Wars are cheaper in human terms because, of course, although the U.S. has declared the war effectively over, young American and British soldiers are still coming home in boxes, others without their limbs, others have gone crazy in the war zone and murder their wives or kill themselves or fill the police and prison cells of the respective nations or litter the pavements with the other homeless people who have been abandoned by the very society they were told they were fighting to protect. Drones, of course, murder just as many people, but they don't run the risk of allied casualties. President Obama saw fit to make a joke out of all of that. He said that you don't see these drones coming. That's true, you don't, until your wife is sitting there beside you minus her head, until your children are in pieces, literally, in front of your eyes, until you and your household are blown up. You don't know that these drones are coming. President Obama thought that was a laughing matter. I can assure you it isn't for the populations amongst whom the drones rockets are falling, and it isn't amongst the hundreds of millions of their co-religionists around the world who grow ever more crazy with anger at the double standards and the injustice of Western policy towards Muslim areas of the world.
Absolutely. You just articulated it perfectly. I mean, the fact that this is being joked about, the fact that it's even being used as our new counterterrorism strategy is outrageous. I mean, they're counterproductive. They create more terrorists. I mean, that's what it's doing. It's radicalizing people who are affected, which, of course, countless civilians have died. It all comes back to the war on terror, George, though, where unlike any other war, at least in history that I've learned, I mean, we're fighting a tactic that will always exist. There's no end in sight. I mean, what is the danger of this new mindset of fighting terror?
Well, I said behind me in the Houses of Parliament just a few days after 9/11, when the House was recalled for the emergency, I said that I despise Osama bin Laden, the medieval obscurantist savage. The difference, I said, between me and you, the rest of you, is that I always despised him. I despised him when you were giving him guns and money on the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend, the enemy at that time, of course, being the Soviet Union, and the British and the Americans brought al-Qaeda into Afghanistan in the first place. But in the same speech I said, if we handle this the wrong way, we will create tens of thousands of new bin Ladens. And of course, I underestimated. We have created hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of new bin Ladens. Everything that we have done since 9/11 has almost been designed to multiply, proliferate terrorism, extremism, fanaticism around the world. And we're at it again, of course, already in Mali, where a dictatorship is under pressure from a group of opponents, some of whom are Islamists, some of whom are not. And these opponents are dubbed al-Qaeda, and we're bombing them. And as I said to the Prime Minister just today in Parliament at Prime Minister's question time, please tell me the difference between the al-Qaeda we're killing in Mali and the al-Qaeda we're supporting in Syria, in order for them to kill thousands of innocent people, Christians, Shiites, and other religious and ethnic minorities. So the whole strategy was doomed and flawed from the start. And everything that we in the anti-war movement predicted has come true, and in bucket loads. And yet, these people don't seem to learn from their mistakes. It was said famously of the Bourbons, whose inattention led to the French Revolution in 1789, that they learned nothing and they forgot nothing. And that's true of the latter-day Bourbons, who run your country and mine. They don't learn from their mistakes. They constantly compound them. And the big swamp of hatred and bitterness out of which Islamist extremism climbs is being endlessly deepened, watered with new blood and new injustices.
It does seem, George, that it's so outrageous, it's so obvious that it really does seem sometimes like it is by design to just keep terrorism, exacerbated and just keep these wars in perpetuity. It really does make me question. You just said something, though, about the hatred, the anti-American sentiment, kind of the anti-West sentiment that's growing undoubtedly in the Middle East. And many also say that it stems from the Palestine-Israeli conflict. You've been very vocal about this. You said at one point that you want to dedicate your life to the cause of Palestine. I mean, how much do you think this tight allegiance that the U.S. has with Israel damages peace and stability in the Middle East?
Well, it damages America's interests, let me say immediately, and that's increasingly recognized by the man who is in line to become the next defense secretary, by the former, at least, chief of the armed forces of the United States, who described in front of the Armed Services Committee in Congress the relationship with Israel as a strategic liability for the United States. And he was certainly telling the truth in that. Nothing could be more damaging to the United States than its absolutely unhealthy, obsessively close relationship to a regime in Tel Aviv, which is regarded by most people in the world as a terrorist, rogue state, yet it's endlessly rewarded for every crime that it commits, and every crime that it commits is paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. But undoubtedly, the Palestine question is the heart of the matter. It's the flaw at the heart of Western policy towards the East, and until there is justice for the Palestinian people, there will never be peace in that region. And if there's no peace in that region, there'll be no peace in the world. Yet Netanyahu, the serial killer and the man who's literally paving the illegally occupied West Bank of the Jordan with illegal Israeli settlements, will be received in Washington and London with the same red carpet, no matter what crimes he commits. And we know from the overheard conversation between President Obama and the then French President Sarkozy that neither could bear to look at the other, at Netanyahu's face. They agreed with each other. They didn't know the microphones were switched on. They said that they could not bear to look at this man. And yet, when it comes to writing the checks, sending the weapons, and rolling out the diplomatic and political support, they can always be counted on to do that.
You were a member of the Labour Party 36 years, then you joined the Respect Party in 2004. What made you switch, and why do you think that America's stuck in this two-party dictatorship, is what I like to call it? It's so taboo to even talk about socialist ideals, which is, I know, Respect represents.
Well, I was expelled by Tony Blair from the Labour Party in 2003 for my role as one of the leading figures in the anti-war movement against the war on Iraq. And I founded the Respect Party, which came out of the great anti-war movement, which organized the biggest demonstrations that Britain has ever seen in its history, indeed 5 times bigger than the next biggest at its height. And we're almost at the anniversary of that demonstration, February 15th, when we had 2 million on the streets of Britain, representing tens of millions of people, I think, in opposition to the war on Iraq, even before people knew what we now know, that the entire thing was built upon a tower of lies. But the expulsion was another badge of honor, because it was increasingly difficult and becoming impossible to remain in a party led by Mr. Blair, who is a war criminal and who should be on trial in The Hague instead of swanning around the world making millions of dollars as a consultant to all sorts of grisly sovereign wealth funds of various dictatorships and exorbitant lecture fees, most often in the United States, plus the fees from being a director and a consultant for many multinational corporations. So it's been good for business so far as Mr. Blair's concerned. He is a religious man. I suspect that on the Judgment Day, he'll find that the questioning's a little tougher than the British Parliament was ever able to hold him to. The Respect Party believes that asking poor people to pay for the crimes of rich people the crimes and the mistakes and blunders that led us off the cliff into recession and worse is unfair, unjust, and we will not accept it. And reclassifying wars as missions and continuing to cause the deaths of countless people in the former empire now being recolonized again, as well as the deaths and destruction of the lives of our own service personnel, especially at a time when we have no money to keep our old people warm in the winter time, but we can always find money to go around the world setting fire to other people's countries. That this way of organizing things is simply not acceptable. It cannot be as good as it gets. There must be a better way. We try to highlight it. And Respect is the fastest growing party in British politics. And I wish there was a Respect phenomenon in the United States. I have a weekly radio show in the United States on a New York radio station called WBAI. It's called the mother of all talk shows. And it's a constant, recurrent theme. I was having to defend Obama, at least to the extent of saying you should elect him rather than the other guy, that Romney will be even worse than President Obama. But people ask the legitimate question, how come that's the only choice?
Right.
Two cheeks of the same backside, Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Tweedledee and